This is the Krulltimate Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Krulltimate Podcast, where I have a couple of incredibly awesome guests.
Yeah, we are Dragons of Krull. We're a two-man band who made an album about the movie Krull. It's a heavy metal record that pretty much follows the events of the movie from beginning to end.
So Keith wrote all of the lyrics. Well, we kind of watched the film a couple of times together to cherry pick different lyrical content, and then Keith wrote the lyrics and all the guitars, bass, stringed instruments, and I played the drums. So my name's John. Obviously, that's Keith.
Excellent. And guys, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. I found your album quite by accident. I'm trying to remember exactly how I came across it, but accident or no, it was a happy one. I'm going to open up immediately with the same question that I get asked when I tell people I have a podcast about Krull. Why?
That's a good question. Why did we make a heavy metal album based on the movie Krull? It hasn't been done before that I'm aware. I don't think anybody else has made a heavy metal album based on the movie Krull. I think there has been some concept albums that were based on films
Here and there.
So it was kind of kicking around the idea of doing a heavy metal record based on a movie. And yeah, wanted it to be one that wasn't terribly popular. You know, you don't want to make a heavy metal album based on Star Wars or whatever.
Or Lord of the Rings or something.
Or Lord of the Rings. That's been done, I know for sure. So yeah, Krull, a little bit out of left field. Maybe people weren't, it's something nobody was expecting. It was something that people didn't realize that they needed, but they needed.
So Keith and I played together in a band some years ago called Arctic Sleep. I was sort of the fill-in attempted touring drummer. And when we were driving to practice, we were always kind of like spitballing ideas for, just metal concept records to do. And after we stopped playing together in that context, I saw a Craigslist ad looking for somebody to play drums on a Krull record. And I texted him. I'm like, "This is you, isn't it?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, yeah, you should just texted me. You didn't need to put out the Craigslist ad." So I mean, it really, it was a way for us during the sort of opening salvos of the pandemic to kind of get something going that we could record at home where we didn't have to be coughing into each other's open mouths or whatever. And it also, I mean, just I love him as a musician, so it was kind of a no-brainer for me because I tend to, I like to be able to help sort of bolster music and sound. Really, I'm not much of a songwriter myself, but I feel like I can contribute rhythmically to stuff for really talented people. So anytime I can ride coattails, I climb on.
All right.
So then, John, your contribution to the album was obviously rhythmic then.
Yeah.
So you're on drums. Were there any other instruments or backup vocals or any other elements that you threw into this album?
Nope. No, I took my time. I would say I probably dragged my feet a little bit, really getting some quality drum parts together. So like pretty much by the time I was able to start recording what would become the final tracks, almost everything was in its near final state because Keith is a machine. So it was really just like, oh, well, yeah, I've got lyrics for all this stuff. Here's the guitar stuff. Just play to it. Here's the beats per minute. Just load it into your software and send me some stuff. I was like, okay. And 2 weeks later, he's like, "You got anything yet?" I'm like, so yeah, no, I probably, had I been slightly more proactive, I probably could have contributed something along those lines. But no, he's got it all handled.
So then that brings me back to Keith then. Can you enumerate for the audience what your contribution to the album was?
Yeah. So I think it was pre-pandemic, wasn't it? Right before
Right before.
Yeah, we got together at John's house, and he has like a big movie projector screen in his living room. It's really cool. So we actually got together and made some coffee, and we watched Krull from beginning to end and kind of just took notes a little bit on, like where there'd be a line or something and be like, oh, we should write a song about that. Or, ooh, that would make a good song title right there. And so we watched Krull. We discussed it as we were watching it, kind of like Mystery Science Theater 3000 style. And yeah, took notes and just kind of gathered a little notebook of ideas. And I just went from there, and actually throughout the entire writing process was watching Krull multiple times. So I would, when I was coming up with like the guitar riffs and the song ideas for a certain song, I was watching that part of the movie. So like Emerald Seer, the song, for example, that guitar riff, I was coming up with it as I was watching the scenes with the Emerald Seer conjuring the visions out of the flames and whatnot. So yeah, a lot of watching Krull was involved in during the creation of the music and also the lyrics as well.
Well, absolutely, because the second thing that grabbed my attention about you were the titles of the songs and the lyrics in each track. The first thing that caught my attention was, of course, the name of the band under which this was published, because first of all, like the last episode I put out here was a collection of factoids, and the very first factoid I put out there was, well, it has to do with your name. Do you want to explain the significance of your name?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we were kicking around ideas for what to call the project for a while. I think the first idea we had was to call it the Glaive. Wasn't that one of the ideas?
Yep.
And
it was taken.
Yeah, there's already a band out there called the Glaive.
Yeah.
There might
way to go, Atreyu ripoff.
Yeah. There might even be multiple bands called the Glaive, because we Googled it, but wanted something that hadn't been taken already. So in doing research, we discovered Dragons of Krull, which turns out was
the initial title for the film.
Yeah.
We actually found a copy of the script, the original script online, because we were going to try to sort of plow through it to see if we could find other lyrical concepts and just lines and stuff to steal from it. Because I mean that, just verbally, so much of that has its own kind of cadence and character. Like it's not. I was listening to the record again last night because it's been a minute, and I mean, just like things like "Each to His Fate" or "This Was Given Me to Know," like things like that, just have a real flow and cadence to them that I think really only would happen in the early 80s and sort of like these sort of salad days of sci-fi and everything. But it made it easier, I think, to construct sort of the narrative and the flow of the record. I mean, I'm speaking for Keith in this case, but when I listen to it, really just sort of a life of its own that doesn't sound like we just came up with it in 2023 or 2020 or whatever. It's really just sonically, it makes more sense to have sort of cribbed a bunch of lines and ideas from it, as opposed to just be like, I saw a movie one time and it was awesome.
There's a nice nod to that Easter egg too, that only big fans of the movie would probably recognize. And as we're all aware, there's no dragons in the film, so you can kind of understand why they changed the title. But yeah, thought it would be cool to borrow something from deep within the Krull lore there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, it was an exceptional choice. The moment that I saw the name of your band, I like shouted out loud. I squeed out loud.
Nice.
Because, like, to your point, it's only recognizable by those of us who care enough about the film to look into more of the film, right? And when I saw the name Dragons of Krull, I was like, these guys are real. These guys know exactly what they're doing. They're 100. And now for me, I'll be honest with you, a little bit of the illusion is shattered for me because I'm just like, these guys are diehards. They have loved this film since they were 4. And then it's like, oh, well, we watched it in my living room like one time. We're like, hey, that's a cool line. But but no, I mean, in all fairness, though, I mean, you guys knew about the movie. So when was the first time that each of you saw the film in its totality?
I have a hard time remembering the exact time let's see, I must have been 6 years old, I think, when that movie came out. But at the time, I was just obsessed with anything that was within that genre. So I was really into like Conan and Beastmaster and Dark Crystal and just anything that was within that early 80s sci-fi fantasy genre was just right up my alley and just clicked all the buttons for me. So yeah, for me, I'd never caught Krull in the theater, but it must have been when it was first on TV or something that I caught it, and I was just at the perfect age to just really be drawn in by the whole atmosphere of that movie. So anything that had swords and lasers and monsters and all that good stuff, I was into it.
Oh yeah, for sure. When I was a kid, grew up in a house that didn't have cable TV. So when I would sleep over at my buddy's place, he had cable. And like when he would pass out, I would just watch HBO until like 3 a.m. And I remember seeing Krull, I must have been probably 9 or 10 years old. And I was a super huge fantasy sci-fi geek, still am. But I mean, like that was all I was doing with my time, is just reading fantasy novels. So, just seeing everything play out. I mean, I know when I first saw Rell running through the swamp with his spear and everything, it was just to me, just like the sort of inexorability of this giant Cyclops just powering through, about to do some stabbing. But I mean, from the shape shifting to the lasers and the glaive itself. I mean, I remember as a kid watching Corwin try to call the glaive back from the goo that it was in after he slew the beast, and just feeling really sad that he couldn't get it back out, even though in retrospect, he doesn't have the glaive for that long. I mean, they go on the quest to get it. He gets it. He uses it maybe twice, chucks it into the beast, and then he can't get it back. And you're still like heartbroken a little bit. Like, it's his buddy. It's his tiny little 5-pointed buddy. How's he going to get it?
He was trying so hard.
He was trying so hard. It was rough, but yeah, I mean, it was formative for me. I know, back in the late 80s, I used to just have sleepovers with my friends and we would just rent a pile of movies. And I know Krull was like on that list, with like Delta Force and some of the other like stuff where somebody with a MAC-10 is spraying a bunch of terrorists or whatever. But yeah, I've loved it a long time.
Do you remember? So there used to be these toys called Constructs. They were kind of like Legos, but more like, I guess, construction, or they looked like little I-beams and stuff.
Yeah, they had little 6-pointed like spheres that you could clip the.
I remember I made a glaive out of those around that same time. I was throwing it around the house and knocking pictures over.
Pretty sure I doodled it, in like 4th grade instead of doing my homework. It was, like I said, it was formative. I mean, I definitely it sort of set the bar at the time for how fantasy science fiction, combination stuff could go, so yeah, just because we watched it just to make sure we knew what sorts of words and stories we wanted to help tell through the record. It wasn't like we were like just kitschily deciding on a film that we had no knowledge of. We both loved it as kids, and I think that it helps,
Well, it absolutely does.
We wanted to approach this as seriously as we possibly could, in a way, so we're not trying to make fun of it in any way. We're literally just saying, we know how to write metal records, so why don't we write a metal record that celebrates this stuff, which, maybe not a lot of people know about, maybe people have weird kind of ideas about or opinions of. And just like, I think that it's like the record itself is like a good primer for the film, because you don't have to have seen it to listen to the record, but the record makes the film sound like it's going to be the most amazing ride of your life, which I think could be helpful.
Yeah, it was kind of a nostalgia thing as well, just writing an album about Krull. And let's face it, the movie is very metal. It's a very metal movie. It has like the look and the atmosphere, and it lends itself really well to having a traditional heavy metal record made about it.
Yeah, well, when you consider that Torquil is wearing a spiked choker and prisoner's manacles because they're comfortable. Yeah, it's pretty metal.
Absolutely.
I like it. I like that. Going to the album itself, the track titles are also things that really stoked the flames of my fandom as I read through them, because you can kind of like see the film in its totality as you go through these titles, right? You've got No Time for Grief, Prophecy of Krull, Thieves, Bandits, Fighters, and Brawlers. Every time I say that line, I don't know if this is me or if this is you guys too, but I hear that really weird whip crack right after Brawlers every single time in my head. Emerald Seer, Into the Great Swamp, Widow of the Web, Journey by Firemare, and Each to His Fate. One of the best lines in the film anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Each to His Fate. So here you have 8 tracks, and every song is gloriously inspired by the film. It has to do with the film, but it also has to do with, I think, more than just the film. Is there a single track on here that you consider sort of like the ultimate piece for you personally, as far as this album is concerned?
For me, that would be Widow of the Web, for sure. They don't really touch on, the history of those two characters in that scene a whole lot, but in that song, I wanted to kind of dive into the emotional aspect of the characters and just that sense of loss and a long gone relationship and how the Widow of the Web went through the metamorphosis to become this different character and everything. And so yeah, just kind of I really wanted to get into like the emotional feel of the relationship between those two characters and make it into like just a really emotional sounding power ballad, I guess. It's weird. The album's got to have a power ballad on it, right? And, yeah. That would be Widow of the Web.
Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to play after Saigon Kick at the 7th grade dance? But for me, my favorite is Emerald Seer. I think that song just rips on a fundamental level, and as a rock drummer, I feel like that one is probably the coolest thing I've ever played, at least on record. I mean, for sure. There's so much power, and it's just so much dynamism in that tune in particular, and then also it's just the concept of it is so darkly specific to this kind of genre of sci-fi. Like there's some dude in the swamp basically just like prognosticating on the future and trying to help you figure out how to solve your quest, essentially. It's so cool.
Absolutely. And obviously metal is your wheelhouse. Were there any other musical genres that you considered for this project?
It could only be heavy metal. And specifically wanted to tap into like that kind of early to mid 80s style of heavy metal, because there was a lot of albums in the metal genre of that time that also tied into the whole swords and sorcery thing as well. When you look at a lot of the album covers and the artwork and the lyrical subject matter. So yeah, listening to things like, Ronnie James Dio and even some Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and things like that. So that time period of heavy metal and that style of just traditional metal with the occasional galloping riff and everything like that just seemed to be the appropriate subgenre to get into. I think maybe like a grindcore record about Krull maybe wouldn't have worked so well in that regard.
Would have been less intelligible. For sure. I think we discussed it at the time, really wanting to sort of have it be a love letter to early 80s power metal, because of the way that those songs are kind of sweeping and majestic sounding, but also deal with this like rescuing maidens and sci-fi type elements. I think we never really considered like making a country album about it. I think that would have been a little weird. It always had to be metal, and I don't think it's just because Keith knows what he's doing around a metal guitar.
Not just because.
No, it helps.
It helps immensely. So let's talk about the film then for a moment. One of the things that I said before we started recording was I didn't know how much I loved this film until I started talking to people about it. I always knew that I liked it. I always knew that I really enjoyed it. I saw it in theaters when I was a little kid, and I had very much the same experience that John did, where it's very formative and it's part of like my imagination play, and it's those kinds of things. But then it wasn't until I was an adult having conversations with other adults about this film that I realized just how literally fantastic this film is, and that it was sort of underexplored and underappreciated in its day for sure. Let's have a little fun with it first, which is to say, are there any lines or quotes in the film that you just resonate with, love, or sometimes will just shoot out offhand in plain conversation, maybe to the complete ignorance of the person you're talking to?
I each to his fate.
Dude.
I know that might make a good tattoo. I'm sure somebody's got it, but that one in particular is something that I've tried to work into everyday conversation. On the way to the grocery store or whatever. Each to his fate. It's such an epic thing to say, and I know that quote in particular was like before we even watched the movie to refresh ourselves for writing the album. I knew that had to be a song title for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could get away with saying each to his fate more in my everyday life.
We gotta start saying that.
Man, I just feel like it takes a conversation someplace to just start off with like, each to his fate. Like, no time now for grief. Like, okay, all right. I've tried to start meetings at work with, this was given me to know, but no one's super stoked about it. And I hate to have to spend 5 minutes like doing a plot synopsis.
Well, next time
I want you to
call at work, I'm gonna sign off for that. Good call, you guys.
Yeah.
Each to his fate.
Click.
End meeting.
Yeah.
I personally am not above slinging a quote or a line or a song lyric very casually, even if the other person doesn't recognize it. It's almost like a joke just for me kind of thing.
That's great.
And as a parent, plenty of opportunities to use that. I like when we have like a big trip planned and we're going to leave early in the morning. And then the kids are like, "Wait, Dad, what time are we leaving?" And if I'm an appropriate distance, I will go, "At sunrise."
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Is there a particular character in the film that you find incredibly interesting or that resonates with you as a person? Like they're, secretly they're your spirit animal, or is there a single character in the film that you would be interested in enough to explore more?
I've always been a huge fan of Rell. I mean, not just because, he's such a badass, but because, like the sacrifice that he makes, getting smashed between the rocks as he's trying to hold them open, and just really like I said, the power and sort of inexorability of him just running through the swamp, coming to the rescue when the Slayers attack, like that. When we had talked about maybe doing this, as a live show, which would be kind of difficult. I had always, like thrown around the idea of like making a Cyclops mask and just playing as a Cyclops behind the drums, because it just, while I enjoyed, Colin, as just like this sort of prototypical dashing, handsome hero, I never saw myself in him. I really thought more like, as I've gotten older, especially, I'm definitely like way more inclined to just be a dude in the mountains hiding in a cave that somebody needs to come get something from, and maybe I'll lift something for them or stab something with a spear if I need to. But just really the reclusive, like quiet giant is super rad for me.
Yeah, I was always obsessed with the Cyclops as well. I think Rell has an aura of mystery about him. There's, from early on in the movie, you don't really know much about him. You see him lurking in the shadows, and you're not sure if he might be a good guy or a bad guy. And then his spear takes out that Slayer, and he's the real deal. I was always bummed that Rell got crushed by a door at the end. It's because I was
Spoilers.
I was hoping he'd make it through the whole movie.
Right.
He was one of those characters like Hudson and Aliens, where I was really bummed when they didn't make it to the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I think I'd be down with like a Rell prequel. Maybe.
Right. Just him farming,
Yeah.
like sharpening his spear for like half an hour.
Sure.
Yeah, perfect.
it would be nice to see where he got all those skins from, you know?
For sure. No, true. The belts.
Let's jump on that piece of lore for just a second, because I like to ask the what do you think, the what ifs and the whys, you know? There's a point where the first time that we really talk about Rell, Ynir tells us the story of the Cyclops. Do you clearly recall how that whole sort of like legend and backstory goes?
No, not particularly. Lay it on us.
One of the things that really got me into talking about Krull was this very piece of story bit right here that we're discussing. Because it was one of those things where I realized I had just taken for granted what the movie was giving to me via exposition, but I'd never stopped to ask, like, what more that could mean, or like, what does that imply? You know, I just never gave it any deep thought. I just accepted it as fact, right? So Ynir explains a couple things. First thing he says is the Cyclops are, first of all, they come from another planet entirely, right? So the Cyclops is an alien to Krull, which all by itself brings up a host of questions,
Right.
not the least of which is, how did he get here? You know,
Good point.
like it's one of those things that ever since I was a kid, I just never questioned. But then when I started asking questions as an adult, I was like, oh my gosh, he's an alien. How did he even get here in the first place? He explains that they're from a planet far from Krull, and that they had made a bargain with the beast, that they would sacrifice one of their eyes in exchange for the gift to see the future. But they were they were deceived. I think the way Ynir says, he's like, they had two eyes like other men, but they sacrificed one eye for the gift to see the future, but they were deceived by the beast, and the only future they were granted to see is the moment of their own death. And that turned them into this sad, solitary creatures, right?
So I think that's one of the things that, as we were sort of seeking out the script and sort of reading more stuff, we also kind of found that like they didn't have enough budget to really execute some of the things that they wanted to do. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The world building, they definitely thought like way outside of what the story they were trying to tell. And yeah, I until you brought it up just now, I never was really like, oh yeah, I guess having an entire sub world of spacefaring Cyclops who are also kind of bummed because the only thing they can see is their own death. Like, he didn't need to do that. He could have just been just a random Cyclops, just like in Greek myth. Like, oh, he was just, here he is. He's out here in the woods. He's got a really nasty spear, and he's gonna do some stabbing. Yeah, I think the thing about the movie mythology to me, you know, in light of that, is really how much more expansive it is than the story they tell on the screen.
Yeah. So Keith, any thoughts on the backstory of the Cyclops?
I learned more in the last couple minutes about that than I think I ever knew.
It's wild.
I suppose I never thought about it that much. I guess, yeah, in watching the movie, I just thought there was a Cyclops, you know.
Well, you weren't wrong. You know,
there wasn't much more to it than that, and just happened to cross paths. But yeah, you're right. But it's a lot more complex than I gave it credit for, I suppose.
The thing you just said, I think, is at the core of why so many individuals think incorrectly that they don't like this movie.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have talked to some people who don't like the movie, and for some of them, it is the modality of storytelling, which, okay, I can accept that you don't like the way the story is told. The question becomes, do you not like the story, or do you not like the modality? And I think the vast majority of people think they don't like the story, and I would wager, again, 9 times out of 10, they're wrong.
I mean, it's a very classic hero's journey. I mean, they, you know, for all intents and purposes, they essentially took that Joseph Campbell style arc where it kind of goes up. You kind of get introduced to the characters. He has a dark point in the middle. He goes through the darkness and comes out the other side victorious. And I you know, as a classic bit of myth making and storytelling, I mean, like, it really, I've yeah, I would tend to agree. Maybe some of the modality of the storytelling can be a little clunky here and there, but overall, I mean, you can't really argue with the structure of how everything unfolds. You know, really just the journey to find the weapon to slay the beast, and then the actual, escaping death's clutches multiple times. While I mean, I think it does get a little bit of a bad rap as a film. And again, in reading about it, part of that seems to me that it's in because of the time and the technology they had to execute the special effects and all that kind of stuff. Like, it feels like they had more story to tell than they could accurately tell with the budget
Yes.
and the cast that they had. But nothing like it was being done at the time. And I mean, even if you've got like the Beastmasters of the world, it's not really. There's no world building that happens, even though they made 3 Beastmasters, and I feel like we could have gotten at least a second Krull.
Yeah.
That's true. Do you think, as the Dragons of Krull, you guys are part of multiple bands and projects, but as the Dragons of Krull, do you think that you come back together to pursue a second album, a sequel to Journey to the Black Fortress?
Gosh, I think it would have to be based on fan fiction at that point, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about other ideas and stuff fairly regularly.
Yeah, we've kind of joked about doing albums based on other movies from around the same time.
But it's interesting because I don't know. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about while we were making the record was whether or not we sort of had captured the entire flow of the film, because it really wouldn't have done any good to be like, yeah, we found the fire mares and then just call it. You have to have some sort of resolution generally in any storytelling you do. So I don't know, like, where we would get enough more information to be able to come up with 35 minutes of well, what do you got there, Krebs? I feel like you've got.
Oh no, I'm just volunteering to tell you about other things that,
the
while I
idea.
enjoyed your first album, I can think of a few things that didn't make it in that would make a great second album. And then you can make it an anthology where you interlace the tracks.
Yeah.
We did I think one sort of aborted idea that we had was, like a Dark Side of the Moon, Wizard of Oz kind of thing. I feel like we are not talented enough for that. So that would be cool, but I'm not sure we could do it.
We'd have to make the album about an hour longer.
Yeah, and get some synthesizers, probably.
Sure.
Some sort of really ethereal female vocals.
Out of all the songs on the album, do you think there's anything important that we may have missed singing about?
Wow, that's a good question. I didn't expect. I think exploring Rell specifically is something that would be good here. I think maybe some aspect of Ergo is something that we could explore.
Sure.
And actually, as I have considered where would the story go after the film, I think that, not to give away too many of the thoughts and the theories that I've had in the past, but I think Titch is a pinnacle character that is underexplored.
For sure.
Torquil's another one. I mean, you got thieves, bandits, fighters, and brawlers, but Torquil as a singular character poses some very interesting angles, especially with sort of like his philosopher's education that we could talk more about. But in terms of like actually like what is concrete in the film, not covered in your album at this point, I think if you did a focus on the wedding with a tragic conclusion, I think that would be a good track. And also they talk about the raids. They don't show this much in the film, but they talk about it a lot, where they talk about the raids of the Slayers. And the Slayers are going through the countryside just absolutely razing villages and things of that nature. But then one starts asking the questions, okay, cool. So when a Slayer dies, there's that weird headworm pilot thing, and it can go into the ground no matter what surface it's on. Where's it going? And where did the Slayers come from in the first place? And why do they just seemingly have an endless army? And
God, take it easy, would you? Yeah, I mean, that's a wedding would be cool. So to your knowledge, have there been like attempts to extend the mythos of Krull? Like, I mean, have people written things that are, trying to tell a further story? Because to me, it seems like I know my understanding was that they wanted to try to create, a saga that they could do multiple installments of. So I'm curious as to know, like, it seems to be relatively neatly tied off. They've essentially they slew the beast. Lissa and Colin are back together. They're gonna, go rule the galaxy. So what happens? Are there is the beast's cousin Ted like mad, and is he gonna come to Krull then and like try to pick up where his cousin left off? I mean, but to your knowledge, has there been any like meaningful attempt? Because I mean, obviously, anybody with a computer can type some nonsense into a text editor, but like, has there been any meaningful attempt to extend the mythology?
So that is a fantastic question. I haven't come across any fan fiction per se, right? I avoiding the answers that include people who are like, and then that's when they entered the Iron Desert,
Yeah.
and they found, I don't want to get into that kind of stuff, right? However, to answer your question more directly, the novel by Alan Dean Foster is based on the fullness of the script, including the parts that didn't make it into the film. And even though it gives every character a far more, forgive the expression, British tone than the characters in the film might suggest in some cases, the information that is laid out in the exposition is exceptional.
Right.
So, and it's not very long. It's not a very long book. I would highly recommend the novelization by Alan Dean Foster. Second, there was a special edition soundtrack of which they only printed 2,000 of these, which isn't very many.
James.
But the liner notes on this are exceptional, both with behind the scenes information as well as lore and mythos that didn't quite make it into the film.
It's a great soundtrack too.
It is phenomenal. I realize people will argue with me on this, and that's fine by me. But I think taken as a total body of work, this soundtrack is arguably James Horner's best complete work. His work on Aliens was fantastic. His work on Wrath of Khan was fantastic. Battle Beyond the Stars was enjoyable.
Willow,
but I think
good one too.
Willow was exceptional, right?
Yeah, I used to have that.
But I would say, as a total body of work, as a whole, I think Krull might be the best thing he ever made.
Yeah, that opening theme too, especially, is just unforgettable. He's one of my favorite. I'm really into film soundtracks, and yeah, James Horner for me is right up there with John Williams.
Oh, my heart was broken when James Horner passed away. Oh my gosh, because it was too soon. It was too soon. Yep. So with those are the two things I would point you to first in terms of like garnering extra bits of information that are official canon. And I've been meaning to revisit the 2-issue Marvel comic that was just the comic book version of the film. And I have them. I just haven't gone through it again in a long time. There's also a children's book that I picked up in recent history. It has photos that are obviously behind the scenes photos that they used as story photos.
Oh, wow.
But I've been reading through that to see if I could find any new nuggets. I haven't gotten through all of it, even though it's a very, very small book. I just haven't finished reading it. But
I'll tell you what doesn't provide any new insight or nuggets is the Atari 2600 game.
Which I have played and beaten, and I love it. I love that game.
It was an arcade.
The arcade game's no better. So, John, to your point, I would go to the novel, I would go to the CD liner tracks, and then, I don't know, talk to unreasonably obsessed nerds about it and see if there's anything else that could possibly come out of it.
I like nerds. They're pretty all right.
I'll tell you what, if we make another album ever, another Dragons of Krull album, we're going to have you on as a consultant.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what I love to hear. I would be thrilled to jaw your ears off about Krull.
I was like,
for days.
This guy would have been really helpful when we were making this album.
For sure.
Well, as we get to the end of our time together here, and I'm very sad to say that out loud, you guys, obviously there's more to you than just being the Dragons of Krull. Do you have any other projects going on right now? Anything that's coming up in the future that people should be aware of?
Not me. I've got nothing really happening. I try to play enough of my drums to stay limber, but I don't have anything currently active. I do have a 2-piece band with my brother-in-law called Priamnor. that is an electric kind of Zydeco hardcore metal hybrid thing. So, but we have been talking about releasing an EP for probably 5 years now. So wouldn't want to seed too much of the internet with false hopes and promises at this point. Maybe someday.
Oh, I've always got an album in the works, always working on something. I have a label that I use to release all my projects called Drip Feed Records, and that's at dripfeedrecords.com. I just put out Panda Kingdom, which was a symphonic heavy metal opera about bread and beer and baking not too long ago, and currently working on a thrash metal album under the name Thunderkill. That's what we currently got in the works.
Fantastic. Well, folks at home, if you want to check out the wonders of the Dragons of Krull, you can hop on over to bandcamp.com. In fact, specifically, you can go to dragonsofkrull.bandcamp.com, where you can find the album Journey to the Black Fortress, an 8-track album with all good Krullness throughout. You guys are fantastic. Thank you so very much for being here. And remember, folks, you heard it from them first. I will be consulting on the second album. It's a done deal. It's contractual now. Thank you guys very much for being here. Appreciate your time. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Thank you for having us.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much for listening to this episode of the Krulltimate Podcast. Now, I would like to hear from you. If you have any questions, curiosities, or comments that you would like to make about this or other episodes, you can send them to thekrulltimatefandom@gmail.com. Until next time, I have been your host, Professor Krebs, and this is the Krulltimate Podcast.